This is what scares the most people when they're making a move to East Texas. As always, thank you for checking out our newest video on living in Tyler, Texas. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our channel. That way you are notified of all of our newest videos as they drop. Additionally, we want to remind you we are your friend in real estate. So if you're thinking about a move and you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out by text, email, phone call, whatever it may be. We would love to connect with you. So the thing that most people are fearful of when making a move to East Texas, or at least the question that I get asked probably the most frequently, how are the tornadoes in East Texas? Well, the truth is they're really not as bad as I think people perceive. As somebody who's lived here 30 years, I don't know that we've ever had, at least we'll kind of get into the numbers a little bit. We have had a couple in Tyler since I've lived here, but I remember them being more straight line wind and the damage was pretty minute, so nothing too critical or crazy. But we're going to break down each county. We're going to look at the deaths, injuries, damage incurred. Additionally, we're going to look at the number of thunderstorms and things like that, just to give you a sense and a more comprehensive picture of what the weather looks like in East Texas, so you know and have right information about what it looks like. So I got all this data from the National Weather Service of historical events and things like that. I will post a link down in the comments below so you can go back and kind of check and work through it yourself. But we're going to go down county through county. We're going to look at the number of tornadoes, look at the number of injuries, number of fatalities, as well as the damage that was incurred from these tornado events. So we're going to start with Smith County. That's going to include Tyler, Lindale, Bullard, and some of those little other smaller surrounding areas. But the places that most people are familiar with are going to be Smith County. If you're tuning into this channel, you're going to be very concerned about Smith County. So in the last 5 years, since 2020, there have been 4 tornado events in Smith County. It in total was $35,000 in damage incurred with 0 injuries and 0 deaths. Now, that $35,000 is not a small amount, but it's really a pretty inconsequential number when you consider how much damage is actually caused for some things. With 4 tornado events and having only $35,000 in damage, that's a pretty small amount because a new roof will cost you $15,000 to $20,000 on almost every house. The next county we are going to look at is Henderson County. That sits just west of Tyler. That's going to include places like Chandler, Brownsboro, Athens, things like that. They've had 3 tornado events, and theirs is a little bit bigger number. I believe there was one near Malakoff that this one is referencing. It incurred $3.35 million in damage, so it is pretty significant amount of damage from that. And that was a pretty real tornado that had a rating, I think, beyond the 0 rating that most of the ones that we see through here have. And I also am not a meteorologist by any means, but I think the way they classify the level of these is going to be based on the amount of destruction. It doesn't necessarily have to be spotted. It could just be straight line winds rather than rotating winds and things like that make what we see in twisters and things like that. So how they rate the damage or how much damage is incurred is going to factor into the rating of the tornado. But those 3 tornadoes in Henderson County led to 0 deaths, but there were 6 injuries. So Henderson County in the last 5 years has had, an event that was not insignificant. If we look at Zandt, which is just directly north of Henderson County, it's going to be places like Canton, Van. There's probably some other small surrounding towns in there that are encompassed in Zandt County. They've actually had 0 tornado events with only $10,000 in damage in the last 5 years. There was a bad tornado in Van when in the early 2000s. I don't remember what year, maybe 2005, 2006, something like that, because I remember they got a brand new high school built because it did tear down the high school. There was another one that occurred just east of Canton, I can't remember, just west of Canton, that it crossed over the interstate. South of I-20, it crossed over I-20, and it actually got a car dealership and Yesterland Farms, which is a cool little theme park that sits on I-20. They do stuff in the fall for Halloween, Christmas. It's a great little spot to take your family. Funny enough, I used to be a baseball coach, and we were coming back from Dallas from a doubleheader, and we were about 30 minutes in front of this tornado that actually crossed over the interstate. Had we left a little bit later, the game game had gone longer, whatever, we probably could have been in the mix of it. But funny enough, that's why I remember that one very specifically, because we were just on the other side of it, not really realizing what was coming. We had no bad weather, but it can happen pretty quick. They pop up through storm cells and things like that relatively quickly, but we were fortunate enough to be on the other side of that. That one did cause a little bit of damage. I don't think anybody died, but just the places it hit was a pretty significant amount of damage because they had to rebuild the theme park. The dealership got a new spot, and obviously all the cars were damaged and things like that. The next one we're going to look at is Rusk County. This one had a surprisingly big number. It had 9 events in the last 5 years with $1.5 million in damage. There were no fatalities and 1 injury. Rusk County is going to be east of Tyler. That's going to be areas like Kilgore, Henderson, maybe Rusk County as well. But those places are going to see, they've seen more events than any other county in the past 5 years. It is a little bit random, I think. I think any area could be vulnerable, but in a 5-year sample, Rusk County had more events than any other county. The next county we're going to look at is Cherokee County. That sits directly below Smith County. That's going to include places like Jacksonville and, funny enough, Rusk. They've had 5 tornado events in the last 5 years, totaling $271,000 in damage with no injuries. Wood County is just north of Smith County, so that's going to be places like Mineola, Quitman, in that area. It's going to be, like I said, just north of Lindale. They have had 0 events in the last 5 years. Upshur County, they had 1 tornado event in the past 5 years, causing $2.2 million in damage. Now, this was one that occurred in Gilmer, and that's the county seat for Upshur County. I remember this one. My in-laws live in Gilmer, so we were pretty familiar with it. I did drive through the area to see some of the effects after the tornado, and it was, you see houses without the roofs and things like that. There were, in fact, like we said, 7 injuries. Nobody died, but that was a real tornado. That was something that came through and was, kind of on the news and whatnot. So we've seen, if we're looking in the last 5 years, 2 significant tornadoes in East Texas that encompasses hundreds of miles in total, and maybe not hundreds. I think if you look from Malakoff to Gilmer, that might be 100 to 150 miles apart. So those are the 2 areas that have seen major tornadoes in the last 5 years. And by major, beyond the F0 rating, like an F2, I think is what both of those rated. So that one in Gilmer was significant, and the one that occurred in Henderson County, I believe, was in Malakoff. The next county we're going to look at is Gregg County. That's going to include places like Longview. They've had 1 tornado event, and that one led to $100,000 in damage. No injuries involved in that. The next highest after Rusk County was Harrison County. In the last 5 years, they've had 8 tornado events, and really the most consistent and frequent of them. They had 2 in 2023 and 21, 2 in 22, 1 in 23, and 3 in 24, totaling to 8 with $276,000 in damage. So these are likely just very high winds and things like that lead to some destruction, but definitely not deadly. Nobody was injured in any of those 8 tornado events either. East Texas definitely has some pretty gnarly thunderstorms, and we will have tornado watches and warnings probably multiple times a year in Tyler, in Smith County, and things like that. So I didn't get perfect data because they don't really track thunderstorms. So what I did was thunderstorm rain. That was the next way that I could kind of look at things to kind of organize what was possibly a thunderstorm event. So in the past 5 years, and these are going to be like heavy thunderstorm rains, so like these are going to be the more severe events. In Smith County, there were 25 over the last 5 years, which obviously averages out to about 5 a year. And in hindsight, and kind of thinking about it, it felt like it should be a bigger number, but that's actually probably right. When we get significant thunderstorms, we will have brief storms roll through and things like that, but like more significant ones, maybe 4 to 5 a year, is not crazy. In Henderson County, which again was just west of us, they had 9 thunderstorm events. Zandt County had 11 thunderstorm events. Rusk, again, more crazy weather. The biggest one in terms of tornado activity and thunderstorm events had 33 major thunderstorm rain events. Cherokee County south, that includes parts of Bullard, Jacksonville, Rusk, they had 18 thunderstorm events. Wood County, despite having 0 tornado activity, had 20 thunderstorm events. Upshur County, which is the Gilmer area, had 12. Gregg County had 17. And Harrison, which is the eastern side of Longview, had 16. So we definitely have some unique weather relative to some places. I personally kind of like the thunderstorms. I don't really have any fear of safety or anything like that. I will say last year particularly, we had some pretty crazy rainfall. Our average is somewhere around 46, and I think we crossed like 60 inches or something like that last year. It was pretty significant, and it has kind of continued this year. We've seen one one heavy rainstorm, and I'm actually filming this right now, and there is one on the verge of hitting us. We'll see if it passes over, but we definitely get a lot of water. It's very green here. The way it is green is because we do have lots of rain that comes through this time of year. I remember last year it rained pretty heavily throughout the month of May, and then we had a storm that came through at the end of May, and because the ground was so saturated, this big storm that had 60 to 80 mile an hour straight line winds, it was pretty destructive because it blew a lot of trees over. The ground was so soft and saturated that these trees that weren't dead or damaged or anything other than that actually were just in a soft ground, so when the wind caught them, they blew and uprooted. There were multiple instances of trees falling on houses. I know I saw at least 2 or 3 spots like that. Those are not good scenarios. They're not frequent, and it's kind of one of the downsides of living in a neighborhood with these great big trees and stuff like that, is that it could happen. I don't remember a time in the last 5 to 10 years, maybe it happened before then, that we had anything like that event that we had at the end of May 2024. I feel like that was kind of an outlier event, but it's not to say that it won't happen again. Like I said, our rain has been ticking up, and the severity of that, maybe it was a fluke, maybe we won't see as much rain this spring, but it is something just to be aware of. We do have storms. They do lead to tornado watches and tornado warnings. We don't see that a lot here in Tyler specifically, but it does appear that maybe there are some areas of East Texas that are a little more prone to it. Places like Rusk County and Henderson County. Those places are actually sitting on the eastern side of Tyler, southeastern side. But it's funny enough that when I think of the tornadoes that have happened in East Texas, they've all been north of I-20. The one that hit Van in the early 2000s, the one that hit Canton, I think in 2017, and then the one in Gilmer in 23. Those are the only 3 tornadoes that I actually remember, being significant, doing a lot of damage, to where homes were destroyed. I don't know, I don't want to speak incorrectly. I don't know that anybody died in any of those, but those were ones that, caused significant enough damage that, it was a big event. And I don't know if that's just where the fronts tend to meet north of I-20, where the warm air is pushing and it meets the cold air. We don't get a lot of it here in Tyler, just lying south of there. It is a little contrary though, because the Rusk County area is south of I-20, so they do have a higher number, but the things that have been significant events specifically tend to be north. So some of the questions that people ask in regard to this is, how do I avoid areas where tornadoes are more prevalent? And the truth is, I don't know that you do. I think you look at historical data to kind of determine which areas are affected the least. There's probably something going on geographically there that the warm and cold fronts don't typically meet in those areas. I don't know. Definitely not a meteorologist, but I think the only way to kind of do that is look at historical data to determine which areas are the least likely to be affected. And it does appear that places like Smith County, Henderson County, Wood County, Zandt County. Zandt and Wood actually being north of I-20 is contrary to what I said, so maybe this is not a perfect way of looking at it. But those areas are the lowest. Upshur County had the big one, but it's only had one. So I think it's pretty random, and I don't know that you can go to a place that has a 0% chance of tornadoes. But if you look at where tornadoes are really bad, it tends to be in places like Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, places more in the Midwest where they do more damage. Obviously, there was a couple in Alabama a few years back in Tuscaloosa, but in my lifetime living here, I've never seen that in Texas. It's not to say that it couldn't occur, but it shows that at least historically, we have seen it less than other places. Texas does have some pretty crazy weather generally. Our heat in August is tough. A lot of times you just don't want to be outside in August. You want to prevent that as much as you can. To me, maybe it's the buildup of moving through summer that you're just tired of the heat at that point, so you're over it. Another form of weather that we get that can be damaging. We did have a really bad hailstorm last Super Bowl Sunday, and that created a lot of damage on cars, on roofs, and things like that. And that's one of the things that will affect insurance costs here, is because we've had some hailstorms previously and a lot of roof replacements, that it's going to increase the premiums on insurance. They've kind of figured some of that out. It's adjusted a little bit. You're still going to have higher premiums than we had 4 or 5 years ago, because the risk of insurance companies keeping you insured has just gotten more expensive. But to me, those are the things that I would be more worried about than I would, tornado activity, because August heat sucks for sure. And the hailstorms, while infrequent, they do occur and can create damage. Another question that people ask about is, do we have basements here? And I have been in, probably since I've been in real estate, probably 5,000 houses, I guess. I don't know, maybe more than that, maybe 10,000. And I've seen 3 basements. I've always heard it's because the water table is very high here. It's more difficult to build a basement. I've also heard aware that the soil is very hard, so it's harder to dig it out and create that space for the basement. But regardless of whatever the reason is, we don't have a lot of basements here, whether it's a cost, a geographical issue because of the soil, the water, whatever. We don't have a lot of basements. So the famous saying that you will always hear the news people, like Mark Skirdo, when they talk about tornado warnings and things like that, go to your small interior windowless room. And that's because those are the areas that are usually the safest in the event of a tornado, because you don't have any glass to break. You've got the exterior walls that are going to protect you and that kind of thing. So that's usually how people will take shelter here in the event that they have to. You know, I think it probably happens. We get a tornado warning probably once a year, fortunately. And, you know, I hope it will continue to be this way. We've not experienced any real threat. I'm the guy that will probably go out on the front porch or the back porch and try and see what I can see when these storms are happening, just because it's interesting to me. That may not always be the wisest decision, but that is usually how I go about that. But overall, I hope this was helpful in giving you perspective that tornadoes occur here. It's not a 0% chance that it happens, but it is a pretty small percent chance that it happens. And if you even look in the areas that are affected, like say this one in Gilmer that created $2.2 million in damage, it may have affected 5 or 6 houses. It wasn't even a significant portion of a very small town. So it is a very random experience, and it can be devastating and deadly. I don't want to minimize what tornadoes are. We all know that they can be very destructive and very deadly. We've been fortunate here in East Texas to not have experienced anything like that to that extent in the last 5 years. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Give us a like if you found this video helpful. Please comment in the comments if you have any thoughts or feedback on the video, and you can criticize all my meteorology interpretation here of the data and information. But if you have thought about making a move to East Texas, I hope this was something that was valuable to give you some peace of mind that tornadoes are not maybe as serious as you had thought. Additionally, if you have questions about real estate or making a move, please don't hesitate to reach out. We've got all our information. We would love to hear from you. Until the next video, we will see you then.